Today I wanted to do something I should have done a few weeks ago and finally sit down and bring you guys some of my thoughts on Respawn's next project, Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. Of course, they were at EA Play. They showed up with a raw, uncut gameplay demo, about 15 minutes. But more importantly, alongside of that, we got a bunch of coverage via Game Informer that really talks, I think, to a much greater extent and with much greater detail in regard to what Respawn is actually trying to do with the final Fallen Order experience, if you will. Because the demo we got at EA Play was a more linear focused experience. It's a part of the game's story and like narrative approach. It is not really indicative of what you're going to be doing the majority of the time in Fallen Order. And that's actually good, because while I like a lot of the things in that raw gameplay demo, like the combat and the parrying system and the health system and, you know, some of the movement, the inclusion of wildlife in the game, I don't like the idea of a very linear Star Wars experience. I think we've had enough of those, and I was kind of hoping that Respawn would give us more of a proper original Star Wars adventure. And after reading the Game Informer article, I found myself very excited and far more excited about the things that I saw in that original EA Play demo. So why don't we talk about all of those things today? Let's actually start by talking about some of the things that we saw in that EA Play demo. I think it's important that we begin with Cal Kestis and BD1, his little droid buddy. Now, I'll be honest, couldn't care less about Cal still. Maybe when I play the game and I get to see his story sort of grow and his relationship with Sari, who is a Jedi Master who's sort of helping him out in these dark times, I'll start to give a damn about Cal. But I'm still really upset that Respawn didn't go like the full player control RPG route here and allow us to make our own Padawan with, you know, like their own little backstory. We haven't had a Star Wars game like that in a very long time. You know, it's been essentially since the Knights of the Old Republic MMO. And that's just kind of too bad, right? Like, you know, going back to KOTOR before the Old Republic MMO, we just haven't had much in that way. And I want to be my own Padawan. I want to let my Padawan become their own Jedi. I don't really want to play as a designated character, especially not someone who, to me at least, comes across as generic Jedi 378. Now, there are some small moments in that EA Play demo where I do like sort of Cal's urgency, his willingness to help other people. He does seem like a very, you know, sort of gung-ho, young, like, I want to help people get things done. I want to help people make things better type character. But it's not as if we haven't had that sort of a character before. So it's just a small piece of his personality that I picked up on that I do like. But again, it just feels like a huge missed opportunity to not let us just be who we want to be, a la Mass Effect, a la KOTOR. And I think a lot of people feel that way. But we'll see how Cal's story plays out in the full game. I do like the way Respawn is talking about the delivery of his story and that it's going to sort of unfold before us. We're going to see the pieces come together essentially as Cal is seeing them come together. So it'll be more about us getting questions answered almost immediately as we experience the experience that Cal is having. Now, in terms of BD1, I think this is very much going to be the saving grace. If Cal ends up being this like blah, poorly written character who we just don't really connect with, there's a chance for BD1 to come in here and just kind of make this great little buddy story, right? In the same way that I think BT made Jack Cooper far more interesting than he was, BD1 could do that for Cal. I also love that BD isn't really just like a droid buddy who kind of shows up randomly, right? BD is very much attached to Cal at all times. He climbs onto Cal's back and hangs out there as Cal makes his way through the world. BD is the gameplay mechanic, actually, for several things. So when Cal calls out for a health vial, of which you have limited health vials in this game, similar to Estus flasks in Dark Souls, for example, BD will actually pop it out over his shoulder. Cal will catch it. When you go to look at your world map, BD is actually going to climb up over Cal's shoulder and do a little holographic display of the map on the ground for Cal. I think that's really cool. There's already a bit of relationship building going on in that EA Play demo between BD1 and Cal. I love the fact that they have conversations with one another. You know, I think that's one of the most fascinating things about droid and like non-English speaking characters in the Star Wars universe is that you have relationships like Luke and R2, right? A C-3PO and R2 even. You know, Chewbacca and Han. Like, all of these characters who we don't even know what they're saying, but we totally understand what they're saying. And there's a huge opportunity for, emotions to be delivered in those situations. Even if we don't understand 100% what BD1 is saying, we get the gist of it. And that's all that matters. And it creates, some very powerful moments. And I'm looking forward to those. There were a few of those again in that demo, and I love it. BD1 is a fantastic character. More interestingly, in case you want to know, BD1 actually took like 2 full years to make. And there's a couple cool things happening in Fallen Order that are first times for the Star Wars universe. One of which is the Stinger Mantis, which is a brand new vessel type that was created by Respawn and the Star Wars studios for Fallen Order. So brand new. The same thing with the Birch Trooper, and again the same thing with BD1. So why don't we talk a little bit about that Stinger Mantis, because this is something you may not be aware of if you haven't read the Game Informer article. In Fallen Order, you are actually looking at a somewhat Metroidvania style experience. The Stinger Mantis is your living quarters, your little safe space, if you will. This is where you're going to come back to. There's going to be a bunch of NPCs you can interact with there. There might even be some like sort of mini game activities that you can do. You can actually customize the ship, some of its layout, its color. It has living quarters, it has a lounge, it has a galaxy map for making your way around the world. And I love that. This is one part of a 2-part piece of design that has me very excited about Fallen Order. Part 2 being that we have what are actually going to be little open world environments. So Respawn wants the player to explore extensively in this game. So when you go to a new zone and they give you an objective, all they're going to do is sort of like smack a dot somewhere on the map, but that map is going to be cloaked in a fog of war. It's up for you as the player to figure out how you get to that dot. How do you get to that next quest marker to gain access to whatever that quest might be? You can explore, you can backtrack. There are even going to be areas on certain worlds that you won't be able to access until you have certain abilities or pieces of equipment. The team has directly been inspired by games like Metroid Prime. They want to give the player a reason to just kind of go out and take in the world around them. And to me, that's just like everything I've ever wanted from a Star Wars adventure. I don't need another linear game like Force Unleashed. Let me be out in these unique worlds and locations. Let me run into, NPCs and wildlife and interact with them. Let me really get a feel for the universe that exists in Star Wars in a way that I haven't really been able to before. I think that's one of the things that I love so much about the Old Republic MMO, especially as the story got really good, is that I got to interact with all of these creatures and characters and NPCs in these worlds that I hadn't ever really been able to explore on that level before in a Star Wars game. So the fact that they're doing this in Fallen Order gets me very excited. Being able to like go back to the Stinger Mantis and go to a new location and run around and explore and open up that map, reveal those areas, remove that fog of war, all through discovery, seems really exciting. And we do get a small glimpse of some of the traversal mechanics. It's definitely a bit of an Uncharted vibe in there, swinging from vines, using our lightsaber as a torch to make it through dark pathways, busting open brick walls in certain paths, using our force powers. Like, I love the idea of that. I love the idea that they're not necessarily going for like an obsessive new game plus here. In fact, the team says at launch at least there won't be a new game plus. It's more about just existing within that first playthrough and going back and re-exploring and really soaking up the individual locations rather than feeling you're just being forced through them to the next objective and through the next one and through the next one and through the next one. I don't think we actually see enough games doing this sort of thing where you have these little sandbox environments that you go in and you explore and you can take your time in and you can even revisit. So that gets me very, very excited. Now, the other thing, of course, is combat, which we did see quite a bit of in the EA Play demo. But to touch on it a little bit more and the way it functions, it's important to know that we've got a heavy, like, parry-focused system here. In fact, the combat system in this game feels very much like what you've seen in Dark Souls or most recently, Sekiro: Shadows Die Twice. You've got a focus on parries and dodges, essentially trying to open up the enemy. They want to empower the player by essentially giving the player the knowledge and the know-how to open up their enemy and then to hit them with heavy, damage, very powerful damage-dealing blows. But they're also not trying to make this a case of like, you just cut through everyone in like 3 seconds. And they also want to make it skill-based. And I think doing a system like that is very deliberate, that is all about the player having to open up their target, is a very good one. It's one of my all-time favorite things about Souls combat, is that I can fight like one trash mob 100 times over, and it's always satisfying to go in, to get a parry off with like, two-handed weapons, no shield, or even with the shield to get a backstab off. I love that sort of stuff. I just think it makes for a really satisfying combat experience, and one that is hyper replayable to an extent that, you know, your more generic like hack and slash Force Unleashed style combat system is just never going to be. You're also going to see enemies that have unblockable attacks. Again, very much like Sekiro, there are certain attacks you're just not going to be able to block or parry. You're going to have to dodge out of their way. And there's obviously a pretty big focus on enemy variety here. Again, to touch on some of the new things that the Respawn team got to help create, the Birch Trooper, which we see extensively in the EA Play demo, is designed to soften up and weaken Jedis before the big baddies come in to sort of eliminate them, to kill them, you know, to wipe them off the face of the universe, if you will, right? In the case of the Birch Trooper, we see a much more extended combat experience. And while Cal will attempt to force push and force pull the Birch Trooper, it will actually use its staff to brace itself on the ground, and then when the time is right, lunge at Cal and punish him for attempting to use his force abilities. This is a fight that I found to be very exciting to watch. It makes for some hella good gifs, and I hope that we get to see a lot more detailed enemy combat scenarios like that. In fact, if you're interested, Game Informer talks a little bit about the fight that we just get a glimpse of at the very end of the EA Play demo with that big old droid whose name currently escapes me. KX series, very fast, you know, very powerful droids. K2 SO was, of course, the more comedy-focused droid in Rogue One, so you're still getting that personality in the KX series, in the security droids, but you're also going to be fighting them because they're trying to kill you, so yeah, it looks really exciting. I want to touch one more time while we're on the subject of combat on wildlife, because we get to see sort of giant spiders going after a bunch of the stormtroopers, and then eventually, you know, going after Kale. And I love to see them using the environment in that way. You know, I don't need to just fight stormtrooper after stormtrooper after stormtrooper after bad guy after bad guy after bad guy, right? Throw some wildlife in there, and hopefully we're going to get to see a lot more interesting, unique, and, you know, even large wildlife variants for us to fight with, or for us to even just, you know, sort of sneak our way past when we start getting into the open world exploration elements of Fallen Order itself. So there it is, ladies and gentlemen, a game I'm very excited for. You know, again, not all of it's got me like super hyped up. I do like the idea of like limited health vials and the combat, you know, trying to be challenging by being more focused on mechanics and the players understanding those mechanics rather than just being very health and like HP and sponge driven. I think a lot of people were maybe upset when they first saw the combat because they thought it looked too easy. And I think it's all about balancing, you know, the power fantasy of being a Jedi with something that is actually rewarding. And for me, Force Unleashed was not a rewarding experience. It was definitely a power fantasy, but one that ran out rather quickly, because you just were constantly annihilating everything in your path. So, yeah, we'll see, obviously, how it plays when we get our hands on it, but a lot of people who have had a chance to go hands-on with it so far have spoken very highly to the parries and the unblockable attacks and the dodge mechanics. I'm really excited to see how all of it sort of pans out in the long run, especially as we dive into the skill trees and get to further customize the way that we play as Cal Kestis as a Jedi. I'm also very hopeful for a lot of the other characters that we're seeing. So, like I mentioned, Saray, who's played by Deborah Wilson. She's going to be a full-fledged Jedi Knight who is like sort of helping out Cal. We're going to be seeing Saw coming back, obviously a younger version of Saw from Rogue One. And then there's some other characters they haven't really talked about. But, you know, if they can sort of develop this really powerful roster of supporting cast, quote-unquote, then that's something that gets me even more excited, you know, in terms of character development in the story than just Cal himself, you know. So we'll see how the full troop gets brought together at the end of the day. But this is definitely a game I'm looking forward to. For all of its you know, sort of rough edges that they showcased at EA Play, like, this seems like there's a good chance for it to be a proper Star Wars adventure with an original story and some original characters, and I'm totally on board with that. Thank you guys so much for watching. Feel free to leave your thoughts on Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. Again, I strongly recommend you check out that full Game Informer feature. It's got a lot of other details that I didn't talk about here, including a look at the other demo that wasn't showcased on the floor. I'm a little bit perplexed as to why they decided to show this more linear experience. I imagine it demoed better, but this is something that I think EA and EA Play has been very bad at the last few years, is like doing good demos of the games that their teams are working on. Like, I think in terms of a freaking Star Wars game, of which EA has really struggled to get out the door, by a variety of very talented devs and creators for a very long time. They should have shown up, given us this 15-minute linear demo, and then showed us the Stinger Mantis and a bunch of open world stuff. But they didn't. So let me know what you think down in the comment section below, and I'll see you all in the next one.